When I was a little bit younger, a friend of mine's band recorded with Steve Albini, and it taught me so much when I listened back to what they did. This was a band where I knew all the guys in the band, and I'd heard them play live at Lit Lounge in Manhattan tons of times. I heard them play live at Knitting Factory. I heard them play. I heard them play all the time. You know, we were both bands that played out, and they would see me play. I'd see them play. I was impressed beyond belief by what Steve Albini was able to do for their band in terms of make their recording sound like their live experience, because that was so unique and very rare. Something you'll find with a lot of guys who record bands, produce bands. Their concepts are always going to be, this is like, and I wouldn't say always, this is a very common theme. We record drums a certain way. They mic everything this same way. They're using the same mics over and over again, and they're using the same concepts of I EQ this way, this way, because they're using their house drum kit most of the time, and they'll try to push you into that because they know what they could expect. So there's less variables, so they don't really have to contend with, you know, what if the drummer has a totally ridiculous sounding kit? What are we going to do to make it sound good? So they'll try to force you into a way of, we want you to use this, it sounds so great. And it'll never be a push in that way. It'll usually be a psychological push, like just try the drums, check it out. And then you'll play for a few minutes, they'll just get sounds real quick, and then you listen, you're like, wow, that sounds great, and then you're good with it. But the point here that I'm trying to illustrate is a lot of guys have their methods, and I was taught this way too, that this is the method of how you record drums. When you're not taught in a studio environment, you know, in like on an interning type of page where like this is, and you don't see it every day of how they're doing stuff, you may actually be better off. I honestly, like, I don't know what, like, I never would trade my experience doing that for anything because I learned so much, but I had to sort of unlearn some things too. And that's the thing I want you to realize. Some great takeaways I got was like, oh, this is what a kick drum is supposed to sound like. This is what a snare drum is supposed to sound like. Because developing your taste helps going forward, because at least you have an idea of when it sounds like this, the result is good. You know, otherwise, like, just the idea of what a good kick drum sounds like or what a good snare sounds like is so subjective, number one. But number two, unless you hear anybody do that right in the recording phase and then you get it to sound great on a mix, you don't sort of understand, like, it needs to be this way, right? But what I mean about unlearning is that's all well and good if you want it to sound like that kind of kick drum, that kind of snare drum, for the type of music that was. If you get into a habit of doing things all the time, all your stuff is going to sound the same. You're going to funnel bands down this path of this is what you should sound like. And that's the opposite of how Steve Albini works. His whole concept was always, I want to make the band translate on a recording to what they would typically sound like when they're playing live, so that it's an accurate, authentic representation. The opposite of stylized. Now, I think if more people did this, they're sort of making themselves more valuable, because it's much easier to do it the other way, where you sort of funnel a band down a path of what you want them to sound like, and you use things to do it. You know, very common. Was very, very common in the 90s, especially, that the concept of there's no visual when you're listening to a recording. So it doesn't matter, like, it's not the same as looking at a band live. And because of that, you have to translate things in different ways. You have to do different things in order to achieve this live, authentic sound of a band, then gets translated through all these microphones, all these effects, and then comes into the computer, and now it has to be recreated. So you, of course, have to use different methods and do things differently in order to get that representation, which is real and authentic, that goes through all this stuff that is not, to then make it real authentic again. Like, it makes sense that there would be some of that, but according to Steve Albini, it doesn't. And I love this about him. Like I said, that band that I loved, when I was listening to their recording, I was floored, because I had done a recording and made it, you know, it sounded great. I loved the way it sounded, but it also sounded kind of typical of, you know, maybe bands that were, you know, that style or something. Like, it wasn't unique to our band. So if it was unique to our band, it may have been worse. I don't know, but at least it would have been more authentic and more real. So there's like a benefit going both ways on this, sonically it may not sound as good, but it may be more authentic and real for the band. So I believe that a lot of his methods and his styles of recording, which I'm going to list a couple right now, help with that a lot. Number one, ambiance always played into what he was doing. When he would record guitars, he had a concept of using close mics, roughly 12 to 14 inches off the cabinet, and always center, like face wherever the center of the cone was, the dust cap, that's where he was aiming for, because he found that the more you skew off that, you know, you're going to really start to bring in anomalies of that specific amp, and different, you know, issues that may occur in the amp may be louder than others, and some may have different weird technical things going on. And the more you skew off it, the more you bring those up. So he would always go for the center of the cone. He would also sometimes use this method of, you know, like 3 feet back, 6 feet back, to get a sound that was a combination of 2 speakers rather than one of the speakers being mic'd, you know, up close. He was a big fan of proximity effects. So he would use a ribbon mic to get more low end boom, combined with some sort of dynamic mic like a 421 or a 57 to get more of that pokiness. And he would put them close together so the capsules would be in phase, but it would be a question of how far away it was would be dependent on how much low-end boom he wanted to get. He was very aware of the way Led Zeppelin stuff had its power. Led Zeppelin, you know, he actually worked with Jimmy Page and Robert Plant, but something you'll notice about Led Zeppelin that I just want to throw in separately is that the low end on the Zeppelin records is all coming from bass and drums. The bass take up so much space, and the drums take up so much space. Bonham is huge. That sort of player, he's taken up so much space that the guitar, if that took up a lot of low-end room, it wouldn't sound like the same mixes, and it wouldn't sound good. And as a result, you know, Jimmy Page is thin. His guitars are thin on there, but you never look at it as they're thin. You think they're huge because the perception is they're so big because the low end is filling up the space and works so well with what he's doing that it never feels like it's thin. But that's a big thing to think about when you're deciding how far away to put the mic from the amp. The closer you get with a ribbon mic, the more low end you will have, because a ribbon specifically will pick up a lot of low end, and it's especially when it starts getting closer because of the polar pattern, because it's figure 8. Whereas the dynamic is going to be a little different. Some mics have more proximity effect than others, so you got to experiment with this to taste. And you could start close to the grill, but then go back that 12 to 14 inches and listen to it and see if you like it better. Then maybe take it back that 3-4 feet. You know, see if you like that better. So there's no real right way. It's all about the sound you are going for. Just don't always lean on the fact that you need a ton of low end in the guitar. That's not usually the answer. And he would also combine that with the room ambiance. Now, an Omni capsule mic captures everything all around the capsule. The picture a big globe around. That's what it's capturing, everything. If you take that Omni capsule mic and lay it down on the floor, several feet away from the amp, as big as your room is, take it way back, right? What you'll wind up getting if you lay it on the floor is a hemispherical polar pattern instead of omni, because the floor is taken out of it. So picture a circle with the bottom cut off. That's what it is by laying it on the floor. You won't get room reflections off the floor, which are near field reflections and will make everything sound weird and bad. But you'll also get this room sound that when that's combined with those guitar mics that are, you know, between, let's say, 6 inches super up close, 12 to 14 inches, which is like a preferred distance in my opinion most of the time. And then you go back 4 feet. If you combine, let's say, you know, one of those sets, you know, because usually when I do it, I don't put a ton of mics on guitar. I'm doing 2, and it's either 6 inches, maybe 12 to 14 inches. That's the 2 zones I check, which see what's better, and then I'm getting my room sound. And sometimes I'll take it back and go like a 4 feet, 3 feet if I want a combination of a bunch of speakers instead of the up close mics, and I'll also add the room ambiance. So for me, when I'm doing guitar, I love to get some good room ambiance in there. Not always used, but a lot of times I will get it. And using an Omni capsule mic on the floor, you can really get a nice sound of the room. And he'll do this similarly on drums. To get a natural sound of what the drums sound like, he's going to lay some sort of Omni capsule mic on the floor, and that will give him a nice picture of the drums. All right. Now, the mics don't have eyes. Keep this in mind. So it's not even like they have to be in the exact corners of the room, like equidistant from the drums. They really don't have to be that way. In other words, you could put them dead on and just pan one left and one right, and you'll sort of bring out the, the stereo field of the drums if that's what you're going for. There's not one right way to do this necessarily. So experiment. That's the other thing Steve Albini preaches all the time that I want to get across to you. Experiment with different things. The way you get good is by trying things and seeing what's good and what's bad. For example, he mentioned, Steve Albini, in a great interview, that when the capsule of a mic on a guitar amp is not parallel to the amp's cone, like in other words, the amp's cone like this, the capsule of the mic should be like this. If it's like this, like if it's coming in off the side and it's slightly skewed where it's on an angle compared to where the amp is shooting sound out, right? Not parallel like this, capsule here, mic cone here. If it's like slightly on an angle of any kind, you're going to lose a ton of information off that mic because it's just not, the capsule won't be basically being used to the fullest extent. The capsule's only grabbing, the only part of the capsule's being hit with that sound. You understand what I'm saying? So because of that, it's the same concept. If you've ever tried this, when you sing backups, like in a live band situation, if you don't have your face right in front of a 58 when you're singing, if you try to sing from off the side, your voice sounds thin. And your voice sounds distant. It'll sound thin and distant no matter what you do. It's not picking up a wide spread. So if you got to get right in front of it to get a clear picture, and then you get the volume right on the board, with your, on the fader, you get the bottom right in the mix. But if you try to sing off to the side, your vocal is going to be way inconsistent. And as you move around, it'll be louder, it'll be lower, it'll be thin, it'll be thick. That's the opposite of what you want. So this is a very similar concept. If you're, recording a singer who moves around a lot, if they're using a dynamic mic and they're moving around all over the place, not going to be that good. The proximity effect's going to be all over the place. Whereas if you use, it'll be sometimes thick, sometimes loud, sometimes thin. And if you use an omni-capsule mic, the proximity effect has the least effect on what that sound is. So if you have somebody who moves around a lot while they're singing, try your mic in omni. It could help a lot with just the ability to capture what they're doing no matter where they go. So there's so many things to unpack here about his style. And through time and experimenting, you will figure out the ways that you like to do things best. He was basically started with kind of using that mic off to the side on the cabinet. And he had to really learn that, like, wherever he got that idea from, which he thought was from live sound, because live sound, the real estate in front of the amp is dancing room, it's moving room, it's where people will, showmanship exists in that space. So by putting a mic stand in front of it, you're cutting out a lot of the room people can use to move around. So a lot of sound engineers would mic it from the side and things like that, and make the capsule of the mic wouldn't necessarily be dead on parallel to the cone. This doesn't work on a live sound, in a studio environment. It's not going to work. It also doesn't really work in a live sound environment, but that doesn't stop people from doing it to get the real estate they need back on the stage, which could be very small. So you just got to realize what works and what doesn't. And this all comes from trying it yourself. Nobody's good out the gate. You have to experiment and mess up and realize what sucks in order to know what doesn't. Like, I'll give you a great example of something I did real quick before we get out of here. I was big into experimenting on some early stuff I was recording myself. And one of the things I tried was recording vocals through a huge laundry chute that was where we were recording, had this laundry chute that was like a 3-floor laundry chute. And I'm like, what a cool idea. I'll put a mic down at the bottom of the laundry chute and we'll sing into this laundry chute, and all those reflections got to sound cool, right? Wrong. Wrong. The freaking vocals sounded like a foot. And there's nothing I could do. It sounded like a foot with no sock. It was just terrible, like just awful. Like no ability to take the tunnel out of this thing. I tried to lean into it. It sounded terrible. I tried to take some of it out and see what I could get that was usable. It sounded terrible. Some of the worst recordings I've ever made using concepts like this that were experimenting and not wanting to do it again, because the performance was good or whatever, but the recording was just using some crazy wacky technique I thought could be cool, but in experimenting with it, I realized it wasn't. It was not cool at all, all right? I used to record a vocal through an amp, like a pig nose, to try to get like a dirty sound on the vocal. I didn't like that either. Like, I thought this would be cool because I was going for like a Strokes kind of sound or something. You know, it wasn't. It was way easier to get that sort of sound I found afterwards in the box, or when you mic a PA, which is like gonna have some grit and dirt, but not the same as like a guitar amp would sound like if you run a vocal through it. So it's just from experimenting, I realized kind of what works and what doesn't. So when you go into recording anything with this open mind of, you've tried a bunch of stuff, but what am I going to do for this? And if you hear something bad, this is the biggest Steve Albini takeaway I could give that I remember to this day, can't let it go. He said, if I hear something when somebody's recording and it's bad, it's not, I have to fight the urge to be like wanting to change it. I just fight that urge and I just see what I could do to capture it accurately. I don't try to change it. I don't try to get them to do something different to prevent it from being bad, because whatever that is could be the crux of what makes this band different from some other bands, and that could be their thing. And who am I to say that this ain't gonna happen with that? That's going in there, and how do I capture it to the best of my ability? Because that's how he fancied himself. Somebody who could translate what was going on and just make it what they're doing on a recording, not change it and add some stylization, his own version and his own translation of what it should be. No, he was trying to make it as authentic as possible. Take this with you, and I'm telling you, you will make yourself more valuable as an engineer, as a producer, as all of these things, because it gets boring when you do everything that and makes it all sound the same. It's not exciting for you either. Trust me. Anyway, it may be easier, but that doesn't mean it's better. All right? You guys, everybody, I hope you dug it. If you did, throw a comment in the comment section about what you like about what Steve Albini was doing. Also, hit the like button if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already, all right? Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios, you guys got this.